Hi, folks. So today we're here with, I'll be interviewing Sheryl McCumsey of Pesticide Free Edmonton. Sheryl lives in Edmonton, Alberta, but her work helping others to make changes in their lives to protect themselves and those they care about from the dangers of pesticide is right across Canada. So Sheryl, why don't you introduce yourself, a bit about your background, what you used to do as a microbiologist, and what got you interested in helping others create a pesticide-free world.
Thanks, Dakota. Years ago I worked at the U of A as a technologist in medical microbiology at the U of A for about 13 years. And it's interesting because I'm finding this useful in that I'm looking at soil microbes and gut flora, which we'll probably touch on briefly, and some of the diseases which are increasing, which is probably due to what's going on in agriculture, like Clostridium difficile, etc. And then I left there when my children were younger. I worked in a very fun place called Mountain Equipment Co-op and did a variety of jobs there. I took a year of journalism. I didn't follow through with that. Basically, I kind of realized it was going to take a long time before I got my own column and that kind of thing. And I still had kids. So, but I found that also very useful in the research I've been doing and so on. And recently became a registered massage therapist, which is sort of also taught me some more things about human physiology, which is just sort of broadened my background in that area. And in the last 5 years, I've done a lot of research around pesticides and made contacts all across Canada and around the world, actually, in regards to pesticides, because since I've joined this group, which has been around for about 25 years, I've been a member for about 5 years, and I've been very concerned about what I'm seeing about how this is impacting Canadians and how they we're seeing dramatic increases of chronic disease in a very short period of time, and we're putting more and more of this out into the environment, and so that's why I got involved.
Yeah.
Well, it's part of the reasons why.
Yeah.
Our own. Did you want me to talk about my own?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So, let's see. It would have been.
Go ahead.
So we moved into the home we're in now about 16 years ago, and about a few years later, we had a new neighbor move in, and he was spraying Roundup over one half of his backyard, and a lot of other pesticides in his yard, and it was drifting over into our property. In the end, did about $7,000 worth of damage to trees and shrubs and so on. And even with our windows closed, we couldn't prevent the herbicide from coming in our house, and it impacted our health. Personally, I had a cough for a whole year. It just didn't go away, and I know that it was related to this. So we did everything in our power to kind of address it. We first of all just tried to discuss it with him. We tried city mediation. We tried talking to Alberta Environment and Alberta Health, and really we learned that there was virtually nothing we could do to stop this from happening. And that's when I became involved with this group. And the more I looked about it in regards to how other people were having similar issues, the more concerned I became. And this is when we changed our diet. And so I can thank my neighbor for this too. We went to an organic diet, and I'd have to say that since we've done this, we've seen other improvements in our health. We've been able to stop our neighbor from spraying so much. And we've also changed our diet, and we've seen, I feel better now at 60 than I did in my 40s. So that's my own personal journey. And I know many people have had journeys like that. I have not a single ache or pain in my body. And I think a lot of people think that's normal, but I don't think it is normal.
Yeah.
So that's how I got involved.
Excellent. So, I mean, I'm sure we're going to cover a lot of ground today. You and I have had many conversations around pesticides and a lot of other things, and you have a wide background of experience to draw on here. But for today's kind of chat, I'd really like to focus on how agricultural pesticides because there's a whole other conversation that needs to be had around cosmetic pesticides that are being used in cities and even in county ditches, and like they're being used everywhere. But for the focus of today's conversation, I'd like to hone in on pesticides that are being sprayed on crops that are intended for human consumption.
And it's the most important, really.
Yeah, and I think it's one place to start. And so, that being in mind, what are the most common chronic health problems that you are seeing in your research and talking with other health experts, across Canada? What are the most common chronic health problems that are related to agricultural pesticide use in Canada?
So it's sometimes hard to say what's the most common, because I think some are escaping our attention entirely. But of course, cancer is one that always comes up. And right now there's a huge lawsuit in the US going on where there's 4,000 plaintiffs suing Monsanto for their exposure to glyphosate, which is the most widely used herbicide.
Wow.
So there's several cancers that are linked to several different pesticides. We have 7,000 pesticide products registered for use in Canada.
Wow.
So many of them will impact endocrine disruption, which is not assessed when we register pesticides. So endocrine disruption is the systems in the body that pretty much control everything. So this impacts fertility. This will impact cancer, of course. And when we look at the number of people in Canada who are suffering from gut diseases, it's astounding. So in a very short period of time, and this is on the Canadian Digestive Health Foundation's webpage, they state that we've gone from 10 million to 20 million Canadians diagnosed with some kind of gut disease. Hard to believe, but people don't talk about gut issues. So we're talking about Crohn's and celiac and IBD, etc. I think that's probably the biggest.
What was the time frame for that? For the 10 million to
10
20
years.
10 years. Wow.
10 years. And so what is really interesting about this is that, of course, irritable bowel disease, one of the causes of irritable bowel disease, which is Canada is a world leader in irritable bowel disease. And we're seeing this in children as young as 5, more and more frequently, not just older people, but very young people. If you develop irritable bowel disease, one of the causes, known causes, is an exposure to antibiotics.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it interesting that glyphosate is registered on the patent as an antimicrobial?
Yeah.
Very interesting. And there's several studies showing how it impacts normal flora, and that pathogens like Clostridium difficile are more resistant to it. Very interesting, that shows that below acceptable limits of exposure of this herbicide will cause damage to the microbiome. Very interesting. So when you look at the volume of this herbicide being used in agriculture, and Alberta has tripled this herbicide in a 15-year span, tripled. It's in our rain, it's in our waterways. It's much more persistent than we've been led to believe. There's lawsuits based on that fact that it can persist for, in Sweden, they say 22 years is a half-life of glyphosate in some soils.
Yeah.
So it's remarkable. And then, of course, our science used to register these products is really questionable, because first of all, it comes from industry. It's not coming from a third-party independent source. We're not testing the product. We're just testing one of the ingredients, the active ingredient. We add things in there to increase its activity or its effectiveness in its use, like surfactants, not tested together when we test them. And then medical epidemiological studies are not included when we register products. There's so many problems with how pesticides are assessed in the first place. But, and really, would we accept a drug on the market that is only partially tested? Would we accept that? Would we accept something that's being given to us without our consent, which is really what's going on?
Yeah.
So gut diseases, asthmas, linked to pesticide exposure, and this certainly goes into the air. But even people who are not necessarily inhaling it, it seems to have an impact on people who have asthma by getting it through other routes. Kidney disease is a huge one in Sri Lanka and El Salvador. That's one of the reasons why it's been banned in one of those countries, is because tens of thousands of farmers died from a fatal chronic kidney disease that they believe was due to the exposure of this. Fertility issues, Parkinson's is a huge one in France. If you develop Parkinson's, you will be compensated because it's believed the link to pesticide exposure is so strong. So, I mean, there are many diseases. To say which one is it's impossible really to say which is the biggest one, because of course there's multiple factors in all of these things. And to say that it's just one pesticide or it's this pesticide is very, very hard to do. Very hard.
Absolutely. So in your opinion, what role does a pesticide free environment play in influencing like optimal human health? Like if you had to compare, like, fitness, diet, getting enough sleep, like where does it rank on the importance of someone's ability to achieve optimal human health?
Well, I think it's like smoking. A person I think it's actually more profound than that, but a person could smoke their whole life and they might develop cancer or they might develop heart disease. But with pesticides, I think it's even more profound because if you're not exposed to smoking and you're in a clean environment, you're going to have general better immunity in your life. All pesticides don't just impact one thing. So, for example, with glyphosate being an antimicrobial, that's just one thing, but they can, they affect the endocrine system and they affect our nervous system. They are designed to damage the nervous system. That's how insecticides often work. Yeah. They are designed that way. That's one of the reasons why applicators are required to wear respirators. They're required to wear respirators because they can have permanent harm from an insecticide that's designed to damage the nervous system. That's how it kills an insect. So if you're getting little bits of a neurotoxin, little bits of what's really an antibiotic, little bits of this and little bits of that, the synergistic effects of that are going to have multiple impacts on your health. And how to decide how much or how little is going to influence you? Well, we're all different. So some people will have gut issues. Some people will have nervous system disorders. How much of the people who are suffering from obesity, for example, who may be eating better, because Canadians are eating better today than they were, is impacted by endocrine disruptors in our food system. They can't lose weight. They're eating better. Why can't they lose weight?
Yeah.
1/4 of Canadians have obesity now. This is not about shaming people about what they're eating. This is about what could be influencing their health profoundly and maybe lifelong impacts. So I think it's huge. It is a huge area, and the volume of pesticides in our food system is remarkable. It's been one of the reasons why some of our products have been refused in other countries. It's economically impacting Canada in that, some countries are saying,
interesting,
we're not taking your product because you got too much glyphosate in your wheat, for example. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you kind of, you touched on it there for, I just lost my train of thought there with that. I never thought.
We were talking about health in general and how,
so for like the ironic thing about this is, like, somebody who's smoking or somebody who's eating poorly or not getting enough exercise, like those are all, arguably personal choices. Like they have a lot of agency over. It's like, I'm not going to smoke today. I'm going to eat a salad as opposed to eating a hamburger or whatever. But when it comes to this pesticide use, they don't have a choice. If being, surrounded by conventional agriculture, out in the countryside here, it's really frustrating when you go outside, you open your door and you just get smacked in the face with that, glyphosate smell or a fungicide that they've just, sprayed for, thousands of kilometers around you. Everybody's out on the same day, and you just get hammered, and there's nothing you can do about that. And you know that it's affecting your health, but it's like, what do you do? And so it's really, that's why I think your work is so important, because this is not a personal choice for most of us anymore. Even if you choose to eat organic food or you choose to grow it yourself, from your experience, you can't even influence your neighbor next door who's spraying herbicides, and it's directly affecting your quality of life. You can't influence that. So it's I would agree with you that
1 minute, I want to get something. So yes, this is why I'm so involved, because organic farmers are a threat at this contamination that's going on in the rain and in the water systems, for example, because they persist as well. So some farmers have lost certification from contamination.
Yep.
And like in the US, because they've now have new genetically engineered crops to tolerate dicamba, we've had in the US last year, from the volatility of this new herbicide it's not a new herbicide, but it's being used now in new genetically engineered crops designed to tolerate being sprayed with glyphosate and dicamba, 3.6 million acres of destruction of crops in the US. And so far this year, I think that was in June or beginning of July, 1.1 million acres of crops. And who do we go to when this is a concern? Well, I've been concerned, so I went to Alberta Environment, and one of the things I did is I did a FOIP, and I found all of these reports here, hundreds of reports to Alberta Environment about contamination on people's properties, drift of pesticides, of people concerned. And what happens? Well, it appears that nothing necessarily happens, which is shocking. So this is why I do this, and this is why I'm working with people, because yes, this is a threat to everyone. You can't just choose to eat organic if you can afford organic. Once it's in your water, people say, oh, we have great water. And I'll say, so when is your water tested for pesticides? So we'll look. What is the requirement? Well, the requirement is that we test our water twice a year. So when we test, one of the times we test for pesticides is in February. So has it been found in our water? Well, it has. Then what do? Well, they retest to see if they can find it the second time. So is this really a way to protect us from exposure even in the water? Like, people are concerned about their water, but I don't think they really understand these things, because it takes so much work to dig down and find this information. I've spent thousands of hours looking, and then I've been shocked, thinking that when I worked in healthcare, I had this assumption that Health Canada was doing this and they were doing that. And then when I looked, I found out that's not the case at all, that Canadians are truly not properly protected. There are many places across Canada that don't test their water, period. They don't even test it.
And so some of the work that I do is some agricultural consulting across Canada, helping other farmers set up, farms similar to ours, like low energy, environmentally friendly, organic type permaculture farms. And one of the clients we're working with in Ontario, part of our consulting process is to do water quality samples to see if there's pesticides, herbicides, things like that, but also to make sure that their water is not high in salt if they want to irrigate for crops, things like that. And so being familiar with the process of testing water in Alberta, we just found a private lab, and they had the ability, they had a like a book, like, huge on like all the different chemicals that they had the ability to test for. And so we went and we tried to pull a water sample for this client's well. And they said, well, is this a domestic well, or is it for livestock or agricultural purposes? And we said, well, it's kind of both. He said, well, okay, well, if it's for domestic, here's our testing protocol for domestic water use. And it was a single page, and they could not test for pesticide residues in domestic water. Any water that was to be used for human consumption could not be tested for pesticide or herbicide or fertilizer residues. They could only do microbiology testing. Basically, is there E. coli in the water? Is about the only thing they could test for.
Yes. Yeah.
It was unbelievable in a place like Ontario. But that being said, the reason why is because like Ontario is one of the most heavily populated areas of Canada, and there's populations are right in there with organic farming, and corn and soybean cropping is the norm there, which is arguably some of the most chemical intensive agriculture on the planet. And so we asked the guy, well, like when you do these tests for agricultural use, do you find any of these pesticides? Oh, he said, oh yeah, absolutely, it's everywhere. The water's full of them.
Yeah, atrazine is found in the water, and I mean, there's, as soon as a scientist finds an issue with something, then they're villainized for it. I mean, Dr. O'Cleary, who is a chief medical officer of health in New Brunswick, spoke out about glyphosate, and then she was gone.
Yeah,
just like that. So people are even afraid to speak about this because they worry that they'll lose their job.
Yeah,
this happens so many times.
Yeah,
it's pretty consistent.
Definitely, and I mean it happened with RBGH hormones that they were trying to use in dairies for milk. Those three scientists, I think they eventually sued the government. Did they not? They were able to.
Yes, and I mean, for years and years, right? We still managed to keep that out of dairy, but of course it is used in other ways and for livestock. So really, you have to wonder, for years of trying to do your job the way you should do your job, and then you're fired for it. Canadians should be really concerned about what's going on there. Like, why 3 scientists are villainized for taking a stand against a harmful product, like, then what kind of protection do we have here? And there's, like, in Edmonton, for example, we use this pesticide called chlorpyrifos. I've had farmers tell me that'll kill a horse, in point blank, tell me that.
Yeah.
And this was a farmer that used pesticides. And Edmonton has been spraying this inside our city in parks, which the label stipulates it should not be used in or around parks, for years. No one else in North America uses this for mosquito control anymore, and hasn't for years, for many reasons. There's 2,000 peer-reviewed studies that show how harmful this is. It's 600 times more toxic than malathion. And we were here in this city ignoring federal and provincial regulations. And I took a lot of work to get some action on that.
Yes.
So when we filed a complaint with the compliance officer, the compliance officer's words to me was the park actually a park? I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Was the park actually a park?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is for, they've done so many things. The city of Edmonton, that really shook my eyes open.
Yeah.
And I made contacts all over about this pesticide and how harmful it is. So it is extremely harmful, and it's still used in Alberta too. And it's mentioned almost every day in the US media about how this is a brain damaging chemical for children, and there is no safe exposure to it. Don't hear about it here in Canada a whole lot. Our media is not covering these issues very well at all. And I can't say the US media is great, but they're at least, some of this is coming out there. We don't even hear a blimp about it, kind of remarkable.
That's crazy. So I know we've thrown around a lot of different names here, like atrazine and glyphosate, and all these different ones. And you've mentioned a few that I'm not even aware of. I've kind of I stopped going down the rabbit hole when I saw how deep it went, and
Yeah.
and thank goodness for folks like yourself who have gone down there and have gathered all this information. But from your research, what are the top three like most common pesticides, agricultural pesticides that are used in Alberta?
Well, it's clear from the pesticide sales report that glyphosate is the most widely used herbicide and pesticide in general, period, and probably Canada as well.
Yeah.
2,4-D is still being used quite a bit and increasing in use because glyphosate's not working very well anymore.
Yeah.
And and neonics. Okay, neonics. We don't have data on that. It's coated on the seeds of plants, so the pesticide is expressed 24/7 from the plant, but there's no data on it. Of course, it's being used a lot, but we don't have the data. Yes. So that's another huge concern. We don't even have information for it yet.
Yeah. Well, and so one of the things you said earlier in the conversation was that Alberta has tripled its Roundup use in 15 years. And
yes.
And so one of the I don't know when it was, probably 4 or 5 years ago, and you'd be able to speak to this better, but Alberta actually, or maybe Canada, they Roundup wasn't working anymore because the weeds were showing resistance to it. And so they just increased the allowable limit. They basically told farmers, we'll just spray twice as much.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Another thing that I came across that was quite remarkable was a little video explaining how farmers should use deionized water, because glyphosate, you may know this, glyphosate was originally used for cleaning broilers out. It's a strong chelator, holds on to minerals, essential minerals, by the way, calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron. Think about that for a minute. But of course, those minerals will interfere with its effectiveness. This is what has been implied anyways. So in this video, they explain how farmers need to use deionized water so glyphosate will be more effective. Uh-huh. Isn't that remarkable? That in some ways they're kind of admitting that it does this, which isn't a good thing either for the plant and maybe for the nutrition. And there has been studies to show that there's less nutrition in genetically engineered corn as opposed to even conventional corn. Yeah. So so now farmers are going to have to do deionized water if they're irrigating their crops, I guess. It's unbelievable. So how far down the hole will farmer go? We know that this damages the soil. There are studies showing it damages other organisms in the soil. There's studies on this. Mm-hmm. And there's more and more science. I mean, there's hundreds of studies showing a variety of things that this herbicide does. Worldwide, there's this battle going on between what the World Health Organization has implied, that this is a probable carcinogen, and industry's influence over governments to try to say, no, this is, information is wrong, it's false, etc. Who do you want to listen to? Yeah. When you start seeing these relationships, who is it you really want to listen to? And how far do you want to go? Yeah, weed resistance is definitely growing, and you've got some weeds that are really horrific out there. This is what nature does. It finds its way to get around it. So are you going to keep fighting it, or are you going to learn how to work with it? That's what organic agriculture has always historically been about, is working with systems of nature, the way it works. And these same things just keep happening over and over and over again. And like 50% of the fields in Alberta are infested with Roundup resistant wild oats. And so like they're just going to keep increasing it, or they switch to using pesticides like 2,4-D, which is
arguably more volatile than glyphosate. And when that stops working, what are they going to go back to? Like, or are they going to start using them together? Are they going to increase the limits again? And so no matter what we throw at these symptoms, we're going to keep getting the same thing. And like, that was the same realization that my parents came to 30 years ago when we decided to stop using fertilizers and herbicides, was that it wasn't working and that we needed to switch and find another way. And it is a different process, but all of the government subsidies and the one thing I like to point out too is, like, in my opinion, farmers are not the ones to carry most of the blame in this in this whole story here. A lot of them have been coerced and essentially forced financially into using these kinds of crops. I know farmers personally who, because of various bank loans that they have to pay for equipment or land or fertilizer or whatever, those loans stipulate that the farmers have to plant certain kinds of crops, and they have to follow certain kinds of protocol in order for the bank to lend them money so that they can farm, so that they don't lose their family farm. And it's really insidious.
Terrible.
That some of these financial institutions have got into, essentially twisting farmers' arms, and then they come out with statements about how it's safe, and the farmers, of course, being caught in this battle of not wanting to do this. The only way that they can sleep at night is to basically believe the Western producer, believe the spin science.
It took me years to figure this out, and I have a science background, and I'm invested, and I'm not on the kind of time schedule that a farmer is on, or the stresses that a farmer is under. But also, it's interesting how these little things seem to sneak out every once in a while. But glyphosate damages beneficial organisms first. And we're seeing an increase of fusarium in wheat, especially with conventional farmers. Well, isn't that surprising? But we don't see it with organic.
No.
That was actually in Western Producer did a story on that from Saskatchewan, saying that how come we're not seeing that with organic producers, but we're seeing it with conventional. Conventional croppers producers are using it as a desiccant, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be there. And of course, it's going to damage the soil in ways that we don't want it to. But how many farmers have time to delve through all of this science when they're being told by everyone else, it's good, it's safe, do this, do that?
Absolutely.
It makes you really angry when you find out that, the people who really should be taking responsibility are not. And then some people who do lose their jobs. So yeah, it's really up to consumers to really push this hard, and to inform ourselves and say, we think this is unacceptable. Canadians that are at a serious risk for food insecurity, even if you can afford good food, why are we exporting and importing all of our food? And if you look historically at nations that have faced famine, is canola going to feed us all? So we're getting our food from California, where they have a drought, where they have fires, where they have a fault line that's going to one day, happen. We're going to have an earthquake. The food trucks are not going to come one day. Well, we better hug our farmers really close and not our pharmacists so much, like supplements and all this other stuff that people are willing to throw their money at, like buy this supplement, buy that supplement, spend $8 for your coffee at Starbucks, but you can't afford organic eggs. You can afford a coffee at Starbucks and not organic eggs. And then you're wondering why you don't feel well. Like, people, there's like a mind that's not working very well. And maybe that's the gut flora again, damaged by all this stuff that we're putting in there. There's a complete relationship, they say, between our gut and our brain.
Absolutely.
So we should be thinking about preventative medicine. Preventative medicine probably has a lot to do with what we put in our body 3 times a day. 3 times a day we put this stuff in our body.
Yeah.
Huge.
there's there's a bunch of things that you touched on there that I'd like to, I'm trying to figure out which one to circle back to, because there's like for me, okay, so one of the questions that I had was what is the most dangerous pesticide used in Canada, and I mean that's up for debate, but I think like I personally would like to have a bit more of a conversation around glyphosate, because it's the number one most widely used pesticide. It's also one of the most common cosmetic pesticides as well that people are using in cities and on dandelions and things like that. So I think for most people, it's also the most familiar. Like you start talking about neonicotinoids and chloroforms and 2,4-D, and most people don't recognize that. So kind of doing a bit of a deep dive into some of the dangers of glyphosate. You were talking about how glyphosate kills the beneficial organisms in the soil first, and that organic farmers don't have a problem with fusarium, which is a fungal disease that affects canola and other crops. So one of the researchers that I saw a presentation one time, they gave the analogy that if you were to take two like say Roundup resistant canola plants, in two different pots, and if one pot the soil was sterile, like if there was nothing in it in the soil, there was no biology, good or bad, and in the other soil there was just kind of regular, there was good and bad biology. If you sprayed both of those, it was weeds. Sorry, this is weeds. If because Roundup resistant canola is resistant to Roundup, but if they spray Roundup on top of it, it kills everything else. So if you had two weeds rather in these two pots, one has sterile soil, one has regular soil, the weed would not die if it was in sterile soil, which doesn't make any sense. So basically they went on to say is Roundup doesn't kill plants. Roundup is not a herbicide. It is it's basically an antibiotic, and what it does is it weakens the plant, and it makes it susceptible to pathogens, and then the pathogens kill the plant. And part of the ways that it weakens the plant is it actually stops its ability to absorb nutrients. One of them being those essential minerals, like you were talking about, like the manganese, which is essential for cell reproduction and human fertility and all these things. So it's action in a farmer's field is that it literally starves the plant and makes it weak so that the environment kills it. And it just blew my mind, because like, wow, look at all these diseases that we're getting that are all poor nutrition, all these gut diseases that we're not able to assimilate all the nutrients in our food, and the low levels of like wheat has decreased in nutrition substantially with the rise of industrial agriculture. So yeah, I don't know, just what are your thoughts? What are some other kind of dots you've connected?
Yeah. So I have contact with research scientists, and one of those research scientists has gone into the Pest Management Regulatory Agency's libraries, which is in Ottawa. You have to get an affidavit. You cannot copy anything. So she went in there and she looked at Monsanto's own studies and on this herbicide, and how it showed that there were definitely gut disturbances. That there was, but they kind of brushed them off as being irrelevant. But they were there, definitely gut disturbances, like chronic diarrhea, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The thing is that today, so many Canadians are living with these things. They don't even know what normal is anymore, is what I think. And because I think the diagnosis part is probably the tip of the iceberg. I think there's a lot of people who are having gut issues today, more than what we know. And we're certainly seeing it in livestock. So there's a vet in Saskatchewan who has 27 case studies on cattle that have definite all kinds of issues, fertility, birth defects, organ damage, and gut issues. And that all goes away when they change the feed without the glyphosate.
Yep.
Just goes away.
One of our
studies.
Our butcher that we use on the farm here, he gets to tour around a lot of different producers' farms, who have livestock, and he was talking to a feedlot owner one day, and because the butcher he was really amazed at how calm his animals were. Like for most kind of conventional feedlot owners, like the animals are just kind of jumpy
right.
And so he said, like,
Yes.
I just can't help but notice that your animals are really calm. Why is that? And the feedlot owner said, well, I refuse to feed my animals. Like, he was still feeding them grain, and it was still feedlot, but he specifically would source barley and other grains that had not been desiccated with Roundup, because he was convinced that
Yes.
one herbicide had such a negative impact.
So what is it doing to us, eh?
Exactly.
Like, I think agitation, anxiety, and all of these things
All
could
the
also
mental-
be attributed
all the
to
mental
messing up of our gut flora. I mean,
Yeah.
it's linked to the brain.
Yeah.
And of course, some of these things are a little bit hypothesis. Some of them are actually documented in science, right? But I've heard that many times. It's actually mentioned in other studies that the animals display more agitation, and they fight more and so on when they are exposed to this herbicide. But of course, I as important as this herbicide is, in some ways, I'm reluctant to focus only on it because it's going to be replaced.
Yeah.
Right? What's it going to be replaced with? And what else is in the mix, right? So, I mean, there's some other pesticides out there that are remarkable. Endosulfane has recently been banned. Most people probably haven't heard of that pesticide.
No, I haven't.
But if you look at some videos, it's horrific pesticide, horrific, the birth defects that this is linked to. I would say it's much like some of the birth defects we saw with Agent Orange, endosulfane. Just recently banned, though, in Canada. We think things are better. So glyphosate is one, atrazine is one, chlorpyrifos is another, 2,4-Ds can be contaminated with dioxins depending on how it's produced and when it's cooked up. The faster you cook it up, the more likely it'll be contaminated with dioxins. Dioxins are the most toxic things on the planet, And then how these impacts of all of these pesticides together, how this combination, the synergistic impacts of all these things, completely unknown, but a pharmacist is always going to ask you, you're taking another drug, because we're worried about synergistic effects with a drug that you're taking that you're taking. What about all of these pesticides mixed up, put in your food system? Increasing, not being regulated. They are not being regulated. A farmer can spray this twice and be very responsible with it. Another farmer could spray it 7 times. There's no regulation. There's hardly any testing to see residues and pesticides in our food system. That was actually something that a guy from BC pressured government to do for a long time before it happened with glyphosate.
Well, I think we've really hit on the just some of the issues around pesticide use, and so I'd like to kind of shift the conversation to a bit more hopeful. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask you a question. We were talking earlier before we started recording, one of the most common supporting arguments for why we have to do this, why pesticides are necessary, why fertilizers are necessary, is the good old "we need to feed the world" argument. And so I just want to ask your opinion. Is can we afford to feed the world via the current agricultural production paradigm? And what are some holes that you see in that theory?
There are a lot of holes. Lots. I mean, first of all, we waste a lot of food.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some countries have actually made it a law that, for instance, if you get a misshaped carrot, you never see that in the store.
Yeah.
So they have bins of misshaped carrots. People can buy at a reduced price, so that food does not get wasted. Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of food waste, all kinds. It's huge.
30 to 50%.
Plenty of food already.
Yes.
Then this paradigm that we're on, which is destroying soil, polluting the water, wiping out insect life. We've lost 75% of insect life around the globe. And people will say their windshields are clean today. This is a threat to everyone's food security. We cannot keep putting neonics into the environment, but it's not the only thing. It is one of the things. That is a huge threat to all food security, pesticides that are killing insect life.
Yeah.
So this paradigm is not going to feed the world. It's going to starve the world. It's starving the world through the nourishment we're getting in our own bodies.
Yep.
It's destroying wildlife. It's harming our livestock. It's destroying everything.
Mm-hmm.
We can't keep going down that path. We cannot pay the health system enough money to sustain the chronic health effects that are coming down the road. They're going to come down the road now anyways, because what have we been doing up to this point? But we're not changing it yet.
No.
You know, it's going to be up to the consumers really to educate themselves and start finding ways to feed themselves. So there's many ways we can do that, right? Like, I mean, a person that doesn't have a lot of money, change a little bit of how you eat. Get involved with the community garden so you can feed yourself some food for free or a lot less, and then you can afford some of the organic food. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's different ways that we can do this. There's multiple ways, but feeding the world, no way. A monoculture in the past has starved people. You just have to look at history. In Ireland, people starved to death because of one potato. Mm-hmm. Oh, we got one kind of canola, one kind of sugar beet, one kind of this, one kind of that, from the chemical industry because they designed things to be sprayed with their pesticides. Mm-hmm. Those are huge monocultures. So even though we're not living on canola here, in Alberta, we make a lot. Like, these farmers are going to starve themselves by growing these monocultural crops because they're going to fail. It's just a matter of when. Yeah. You know, you have one pest you can't control, takes over everything. So yeah, you need diversity. We need diversity. That's how you feed the world. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I mean, the only thing that I would add to that, Sheryl, is, and we were talking about this before we started as well, was fertilizer use and how that ties into all this as well, because
yes.
So I'll let you kind of touch on how fertilizer ties into that same conversation as well.
So the OECD report for Canada, which is a group of countries around the world, European countries, US, Canada, so on, about, I forget how many, 29, 30 countries. Anyways, the report for Canada showed that Canada has doubled synthetic fertilizer use since 2000, leading all the OECD nations in our increase of synthetic fertilizer. And there's lots of studies showing how synthetic fertilizer is damaging to microbes. There's a new study that came out that showed how plants are more susceptible to disease with synthetic fertilizer. So that's a really good paradigm for the chemical industry. Our government is aware that this is increasing the harm to climate change impacts because this breaks down to nitrous oxide, a very potent greenhouse gas.
Yeah.
So even if we don't believe in climate change, however, this damages our water in a huge way. And it's not really feeding plants because you need microbes to feed plants, just like our gut flora. If you're taking lots and lots of vitamin pills, for example, but you have no beneficial gut flora, you're probably not going to be a very healthy person.
No.
For the same reason that if you don't have healthy soil, and it's not really going to come from synthetic fertilizers, it's going to come from organic matter in the soil that provides those microbes.
Yeah.
And so that's a different kind of farming that we're not doing enough of.
Absolutely. And just to put the fertilizer use into perspective in terms of like how much energy is involved in fertilizer, like there's an article I read recently that the amount of fertilizer that's used in Iowa, in the Iowa cornfields, is the equivalent to like thousands of Hiroshima bombs. Like the energy, like fertilizer can be used to turn into dynamite. Or another analogy is 1 pound of fertilizer is roughly the equivalent in terms of energy, calories, to 1 gallon of diesel, or 4 liters of diesel. And most agricultural crops today are fertilizer, and this is just the nitrogen component, not even the phosphorus and the potassium, just the nitrogen alone. 1 pound of nitrogen is equal to about 1 gallon of diesel. And
Yeah.
most crops are fertilized with 50 to 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. Some crops are much higher. Some of them are multiple times per year. So every acre of land is potentially getting 100 gallons of diesel poured on it. And so that, and I've done some math on this in terms of like, you take any crop, corn, wheat, soybeans, and like, you can grow a certain amount of calories per acre from that crop, given like an optimal yield. For most crops, if you fertilize at the recommended rates, or like the standard, whatever the norm is, it's a net loss in terms of calorie production.
Yeah.
Just with the nitrogen fertilizer alone. And then you spray 9 times, and you harrow it another 10 times, and you have to combine it and move that from one bin to another. Like, so just from a physics perspective, there is not enough energy in the world to feed us through this inefficient and ineffective agricultural system, because it costs so much energy.
And another aspect, you don't have to believe anything I say, not a word or anything that you say. But several universities have written how we're going to run out of phosphorus, which is one of the essential ingredients in fertilizer. We're going to run out of it.
Yep.
Oh, but maybe you don't believe them. Maybe you don't believe that either. But everyone is saying it's going to get harder to mine it. It's going to take more energy to mine the phosphorus, which means fertilizers are going to go up in price. If you only care about money, and that's all you care about, your fertilizer is going to go up in cost.
Yeah.
If you don't think about anything else, and that's the only thing you think about. So every aspect of this, you look at it, you go, it's really not working.
No. And then especially when you look at like the Rodale Institute has done, I think it's 25 years of organic versus conventional agriculture trials for 25 years, side-by-side comparisons. And every year for 25 years, organic has equaled or bettered the production of conventional stuff. So basically, like take everything else aside. It's like even if the fertilizers were coming from free somewhere, even if peak phosphorus wasn't there, we have proof that even on our farm, like we are getting yields in some of our grain crops, because that's an easy way to measure things, that are equal to or better than guys that are spraying 7 times and fertilizing and doing all those other things. So even in terms of yield, looking at the volume of stuff in a grain bin, not looking at the quality of that, because that's a totally different conversation, is like, there's calories, but then there's nutrient density. And we talked about how glyphosate is a chelator, and it binds up essential minerals and all those other things. So okay, I feel really good about that. I think we've driven a few nails in the coffin there. So what are, moving on now, what are some of the key barriers for Albertans to have a pesticide-free environment to raise their children in? You've mentioned quite a bit about regulation, but what hurdles do we need to jump over to get to a place where we don't have to be scared to go outside in the evening, or to walk in parks, or to drink water? What do we need to do to get to that point as a culture?
Well, it's massive, really. I mean, to me, it's very disturbing to see how industry has such a power over government and even our universities. And so information is always power. And so really sharing information with each other that's, based on independently accessed information, or I don't know how to put this exactly, but there is good there are people doing really good things out there. It's just requires some effort to get this information out to people. First of all, people need to be informed in order to know how to change anything. So information is power, and that's a problem. We've lost half of our newspaper reporters in Alberta a couple of years ago, and we have one family that runs pretty much all the media across Canada. So independent media is a problem because there's a lot of bad information out there too, like even people who are doing independent media. So it's frustrating and difficult for people to even get good information to start with. But at a certain point of this, we kind of know pesticides are poisons. It's pretty simple. Pesticides are poisons. They are designed to kill things. So avoiding those things in every aspect of our life is the best thing to do. And finding ways to do it. There are a variety of ways to do it. And to try to support those people who are doing something else. And to try to reach, if there is a way to get democracy back into the system and through our elected officials, by letting them know this is not good for them either, regardless of how they look at it. It is not good for anyone to keep going on this road. Even the people who have lots of money, this is not good. We have to change it. So it's going to take a lot of energy for all of us to work together to change it. And it's still not clear to me what we have to do, but I'm still trying to lobby government to open their eyes and get them to see the connections. So, if Alberta Environment is doing one thing and Alberta Health is doing another thing, they need to be working together to understand they're related to one another.
Yeah.
That these issues are related to one another. That what's in our environment affects our health directly. Surprise.
It's hilarious that we even need to be having this conversation, that somebody needs to be trying to inform Alberta and Canada Health that our environment affects our health. That's insane.
Yeah, I think there's a fear, of course, like I've said. I know there's a fear that people are worried that if they don't say enough, if they say something, that they could lose their job.
Yeah.
And that's happened. It's happened to Dr. David Swan, who talked in support of Kyoto, Accord. And so it's a legitimate fear. So that means then that it is really up to us to be supportive to those changes in a collective way. This is impacting all our water. Every issue is affected by water. Everything that we do, and we cannot undo some of these harms. They cannot just be undone. So we don't respect water in Canada half as near as much as I know down where you are right now. Water is respected because you're kind of without it, but that's why organic is better again, because the organic system is resilient to these things far more than other systems, more resilient. Mm-hmm. Just like if you're healthy, if your immune system is healthy, you're going to be able to fight disease a lot easier when you get sick. It's really that simple.
Yeah. So I mean, just to from what I'm gathering from this whole conversation is change is not going to come from the top down. The government, or at least the what is it? Mark Twain says that politics is the triumph of hope over experience. And so we've given their track record, they're not going to change. And so the barrier is really for us to get together as a group of concerned citizens and demand change and whatever that takes. And it's
yes, and we don't realize our power.
No.
We do have power. We are what drives this wheel. So regardless of the systems that are controlling the things that we do, etc., and how they can bind us from making better decisions, etc., it's still we are the ones that drive it. So every decision and everything that we do in our lives. So if you go out and you buy canola that's not organic, or even if it is organic, for example, whatever you do, everything we consume drives this wheel.
Yeah.
It drives the system forward in the direction it continues to go. Mm-hmm. That's the reality of it. And so we could say food is too expensive. Well, being sick is expensive. Mm-hmm. Buying supplements are expensive. Buying a Starbucks coffee, sorry, I hate to shame people from going to Starbucks, but you can buy a whole dozen eggs and then some for it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, what most of our customers, for example, a typical family of 4 spends the same amount on a year's worth of protein like half a pig, a quarter cow, and a dozen eggs a week for a year, they spend the same amount on their meat as they do on their cell phone bills. And it's really it's a trivial amount of money, and that's just one way that people can make change. But there's the old cliche that we get to vote 3 times a day. Every 4 years we get to vote for who's gonna lead us off the cliff.
Yeah.
But 3 times a day, every day, we get to decide if we're gonna put our money where our mouth is, and
Yeah.
but even more than that is like you mentioned before, growing your own food. I love gardening, and a big part of what our work on the farm here is to educate people on how to garden. Right now we haven't bought groceries for months because we're like the gardens are in production. We hardly buy any groceries throughout the whole year, but like 1 hill of potatoes is a 5-gallon bucket. And it's like it's really to know how to partner with these natural systems, and that's there's no fertilizer involved in that whatsoever. We haven't used it for 30 years. It's entirely possible. It just requires a will to want to change.
If you have a house, you're already advantaged to have a garden.
Yeah.
But people go, well, I'm very unconventional. If we think I'm outside the box, there's ways.
There's ways.
In the back alley where people don't want to look after the grass back there, nobody uses it. I grew potatoes. I had potatoes back there, and everybody, very unconventional. But I'll tell you, when a neighbor came by, and one year I had potatoes that were this big, and they had no holes in them. They were perfectly fine.
Yeah.
One potato that big, and a neighbor would come by, and I'd say, "Would you like a potato?" And they'd look at me like, "So," and I gave it to them, and they'd be like, their eyes would go all big. Holy shit, that'll feed a family of 6, And that's how you make friends with your neighbors. Then you trade. Your neighbor has apples, you give them some cherries, and it's actually becomes a social thing, not just a way of creating better health for yourself. But, and I realize not everybody has the advantage to grow things because they don't live in a home. Mm-hmm. So that's, when you reach out to your community and you say, can we create a community garden? Because there's a need here.
Yeah.
And that makes it more affordable to buy organic from farmers like Dakota Cohen, who is, these are our heroes, our good farmers in Alberta who are really doing things to change this paradigm. Extremely important. It affects every aspect of our life. If our health is bad, nothing will work well for us. Health matters so much. Mm-hmm. And this is something we do every day.
Yeah.
We can kind of integrate it. It's something you can't change overnight, maybe. Some of us we do. But, I have a vegetable garden on the side of my house. Mm-hmm. So on the side of my house where there's just, grass. It's the hottest part. I have grapes. I have carrots. I have onions. I have, that supplements my diet. And it's great. It tastes better than anything else you're ever going to buy.
Yeah.
And it's good for your kids if you have kids to see that.
Absolutely. So Sheryl, just to wrap things up, like you have a ton of resources online, and I'm going to post some links to your guys' website and your Facebook groups below, and some of the resources that you sent me. But I guess, where can people find out more about your work? And right now, what are the 3 things that people can do, like right now, the most important things that they can do to help create a pesticide-free world, in your opinion?
Well, in Alberta here, we still need, even in our municipalities, we still have this mindset.
Yeah.
To work on that mindset that is kind of rigid, that we have to have pesticides, we need to use pesticides. But in our own personal life, we need to clean up our environment as much as possible. Not just pesticides, but even, in your own home. Do you need all these cleaners, etc.? Mm-hmm. All these things, we don't need them. We can use vinegar and water for a lot of things. So the first thing is to try to clean up things in your own diet and your own health, because otherwise you're going to be paying for those down the road anyways. Mm-hmm. That should be a priority to everyone, is their own personal health and the personal health of their family. And then getting involved with a variety of groups, like we could definitely have more support in our group. We have a lot of people in Alberta are very focused on the oil and gas industry if they're involved in environment, because it's a big concern for people here. But this is a huge concern, and we need more support for it. So that is another thing. Or trying to influence everyone and everyone around you.
How can people get involved with the Pesticide Free Alberta movement and other movements across Canada? Like, what are some links for that?
Yeah, well, if they're not on Facebook, they can message us on Facebook. But if they're not on Facebook, they can email us on our website. And I have to say, I apologize, our website is so outdated right now by years, literally. I had a university student working on it, but I haven't had time to update it. I've been kind of going all over the place with things lately. But so I mean, actually, it'd be great to get somebody who's good with website stuff to update our website, because I'm tediously slow at that. My husband's good at it, but he's been very busy as well. And so we need more people involved. And you know, like even if you're involved with at the community garden, you're doing something. So, but we need to collectively start communicating these groups and bringing them together. So there's many of them. You know, I'd like to create a Pesticide Free Canada. And really, it's not totally pesticide free. It's just, we call it that because it's easier for people to find us. I have people from Saskatchewan contacting us, and they don't know about the Saskatchewan group because they have some kind of obscure name.
Yeah.
But it's called the Saskatchewan Network for Alternatives to Pesticides. And people just don't find that on me, right? They find us. And so then I forward them to the Saskatchewan group, right? So Pesticide Free Canada, well, we're never really going to be truly pesticide free because we use antibiotics, and those are actually pesticides. And there's other things that we do that are really considered pesticides. So it's never really going to be Pesticide Free Canada. But we want to look at changing the paradigm, the thinking. Thinking has to change to creating instead of killing, and understanding things better instead of this mindset of like, really, it's like a sledgehammer over a problem. And it's not working. Because pesticides are not specific either. They really, they're broad spectrum in how they work. Even the specific ones really kill a lot of things and impact a lot of things all at the same time. So it's like taking antibiotics. You take them, it's worse than that, but it's like taking antibiotics. They do damage. Every drug does damage, has side effects. I don't understand why we think pesticides don't have really nasty side effects.
Yeah.
So if we can create health in our agricultural systems, first, we don't need the pesticides afterwards, because we've done a different system that doesn't have sickness within it, right? Sort of almost that kind of analogy. So yeah, everything and anything we can do, starting with our own health.
Perfect.
And hug your farmer, not your pharmacist.
I like that. I'm gonna, yeah. So can you leave us with some words of hope before we go, or a favorite quote that you have, or just anything you'd like to words of encouragement?
Well, is overwhelming as these issues are, marketing, you know, the connections are happening. I mean, that's evident in that there are more farmers markets and there's more people going to them. So there's a growing awareness that that's important, that connection between farmers and consumers, that direct connection is extremely important, and it's growing. And really, you know, government talks about stakeholders and industry all the time, and they almost, to me, feel like one and the same. We need to shame them, if nothing else. Or, you know, people are taking them to court. Get them to do their job. We pay we're their employers, really. Why are we paying taxes to people who are not doing a job for us, and they're doing it for industry? Exactly. This is backwards, you know? I mean, so we need to put pressure, put the heat to the feet of these people and say, you know, find ways to change the system. It's just,
and it is possible. You've mentioned several like Monsanto's right now is being sued. You said, is it 4,000 or 40,000?
4,000 plaintiffs.
4,000 plaintiffs, and
325 lawsuits.
yeah,
The first one is a man who was spraying pesticides in school property, and he's dying. They don't expect he'll survive the court case.
jeez.
He has non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and he was applying pesticides the way, there was no warnings about how he should do things differently on the label, for example. Even.
Yeah.
So he was, and then of course, the thing that I think about is, yes, he's dying of cancer. What about all these kids who are playing in that school field every day?
Yeah.
I mean, really.
He was probably the only one wearing a mask.
Yeah. Well, it's like it doesn't go away. We think it goes away. One more thing I want to add is that pesticides, when they break down, do not break down to harmless substances. A lot of the time, those things they break down to can be as harmful and sometimes even more harmful than the original ingredient. They don't just magically disappear. They don't just go away.
Yeah.
So they are building.
Yeah.
In the environment and in the ecosystems that we require a healthy ecosystem for our existence on this planet. Literally.
Yeah.
We are not disengaged from it. We're not going to Mars. For a long time, and like we really need to figure this out. So totally doable. It's clear it's totally doable.
Yeah.
That's the good news. It's all the ways of dealing with these problems are already there.
Yeah.
They're there.
Yeah, we just need to
have to embrace them.
Absolutely. Well, I can't think of anything more hopeful to end on than that. So I really appreciate your time today, Sheryl, and the work that you've been doing for the last decade now with there's 15 years you said, right?
No, only 5 really.
Only 5. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think over a period of time, I kind of realized, even in my own property, hey, the ant poison doesn't work, and what else is the ant poison killing? And even my plants don't look very good where I'm putting that ant poison. I mean, we all kind of learn these things. It's not like it's not a blame game.
No.
We all kind of come to this somewhere in our lives where we realize this is not really working very well.
Yeah.
And we decide.
Just make the shift. Yeah. And it's great to have like a community that you can walk into that of other people who are working with the same problems and trying to find new alternatives to this stuff, because they are there. It just takes some creativity, and that's what's fun is there's tons of job opportunities for people to figure out all this stuff. Yes, that's good.
It's a different kind of thinking, but weeds are interesting.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are very good for you.
Yeah.
And we just have, we've been brainwashed very well. Marketing is very effective. Yeah. Very effective. But, some of us realize, hey, they're trying to sell something. Do we really want to buy it? Is it really good for us?
Yeah.
We have to start asking those questions more often.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks so much, Sheryl. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Awesome, Dakota.